Ever imagine dedicating your life to a dream and then like having that dream turn into a total nightmare?
Oh, yeah.
That's kind of what happened to Sandra Birmore. She was a young woman. She really admired law enforcement,
Hmm.
but she was really exploited and possibly murdered by the very people she trusted. So today we're going to be looking into Sandra Birmore's story. She was 23 years old. She was an aspiring police officer,
Right.
and she was found dead in her apartment in February of 2021.
Yeah.
Initially, it was ruled a suicide,
Right.
but there are all these questions about the circumstances of her death that kind of raise some red flags about the Stoughton Police Department and the Police Explorers Program.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're gonna look into this. We're gonna use this in-depth article from Boston Magazine. It's called "The Betrayal of Sandra Birmore,"
Okay.
and we're also gonna be pulling from the Boston Globe and this episode of My Favorite Murder called ERM 630-864-6401.mp3.
Sounds good.
So Sandra's early life, um, she had a bit of a difficult childhood. She had some academic and social difficulties,
Mm-hmm.
but when she was 13, she joined the Police Explorers Program in Stoughton, Massachusetts,
Okay.
and that kind of gave her this sense of purpose.
Right. Yeah.
Now, the Police Explorers Program it's supposed to give young people good experiences with law enforcement.
Yeah.
You know, to if they're interested in that as a career, it's kind of a stepping stone.
Right.
And it really did seem like the program was really good for her. Her mom even wrote a thank you letter to the deputy police chief
Wow.
who ran the program,
Okay.
and she was praising it for the good impact that it had on Sandra's life. Her grades improved. She found a community.
That's great.
But behind all that, the mentorship, the support, there was this really dark story unfolding.
Yeah.
And it's alleged that a police officer named Matthew Farwell, who was 24 at the time,
Right.
started to groom Sandra when she was only 13.
Oh, wow.
And she was, a vulnerable kid, looking for guidance and wanting to belong.
Yeah.
And this is where things get really, really disturbing.
Yeah.
Because no matter when the relationship, allegedly became physical, there's this power imbalance
Right.
that goes back to when she was an explorer.
Right.
And it casts this long shadow.
Yeah. It's really disturbing, that misuse of authority. You really, really need to have safeguards, and people need to be vigilant, especially when it comes to adults in positions of power interacting with kids,
Yeah.
young people.
And it's even more complicated because it wasn't just Matthew Farwell. There were two other officers who allegedly also had sexual relationships with Sandra when she was an adult.
Oh, wow.
And one of those officers, one of those was Matthew's twin brother.
Oh, geez.
And the other was the deputy chief, the one who ran the Explorers Program, and the one who Sandra's mother had, thanked in that letter.
Jeez. That is so troubling. What's so disturbing about this is that it doesn't seem like an isolated thing.
Yeah.
Like with multiple officers.
Right.
It's like a pattern of behavior, right? And it makes you think about the culture of the police department,
Right.
like how did this go on for so long
Yeah.
unchecked?
And tragically, Sandra's story doesn't end there.
Oh, jeez.
So as she got into her 20s, she became fixated on having a baby with Matthew.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like she was trying to find something, like some stability, some kind of connection
Right, yeah.
in a relationship that was obviously toxic.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. Like, what would drive somebody to seek a connection with somebody who's causing them so much pain?
Yeah.
I mean, was she just like desperately trying to find love and family, or
Yep.
something she didn't get as a kid, or was it like years of manipulation?
Yeah.
And it just warped her view of what a good relationship was.
Right.
It's hard to know.
It's really hard, and it's tough to grapple with these questions. So let's fast forward to the night that Sandra died, February 1st, 2021.
Okay.
There was a snowstorm raging outside, but inside her apartment it seemed like a normal evening.
Mm-hmm.
There's security footage that shows that Matthew was visiting her, and he leaves just a few minutes after her phone records its last steps.
Okay.
And get this, he went straight from her apartment to the hospital where his wife was giving birth to their third kid.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's That's really suspicious.
Yeah.
Like the timing of his visit, him leaving, and then
Yeah.
with everything we know, it's just a lot of red flags. It really needs to be looked into.
Yeah. And Sandra's aunt and her cousin suspected foul play right away. Um, they were pointing to Matthew. They said he needs to be, investigated.
Right.
But the police, at first they seemed to miss some key details, like there was laundry that was, in the middle of a cycle.
Oh, wow.
She had a scheduled OB appointment.
Okay.
There was a broken necklace
Mm-hmm.
and a clump of hair
Okay.
found near her body.
Yeah.
And they were really slow to review the security footage.
Right. And that's really concerning,
Yeah.
All those things that they kind of skipped over,
Right.
Like the laundry, the appointment, that sounds like she was like, making plans, like she had a future.
Right.
That doesn't sound like suicide.
Right.
I mean, were they too quick to judge,
Yeah.
I mean, you have to wonder if there was some bias because other officers were involved,
Right. Right. But thankfully, eventually the Staunton Police Department did start an internal affairs investigation.
Hmm.
And it was led by their very first female police chief.
Okay.
And what they found was shocking. I mean, they confirmed those abuse allegations.
Mm-hmm.
They found thousands of text messages between Sandra and Matthew.
Wow.
And they even uncovered evidence that the deputy chief had, acted inappropriately with other girls in the program.
Jeez. That investigation really changed things, It showed that there was this pattern of bad behavior,
Yeah.
Within the department. And it showed that, what Matthew Farwell was accused of wasn't just a one-off thing.
Yeah.
It's really important that the new chief, had the courage to go through with this investigation, even though it might make the department look bad,
Yeah. But the story still doesn't end there.
Hmm.
So in May of 2024, the Marshall Project published a report.
Okay.
And it exposed this widespread abuse that was happening in police explorers programs all over the country.
Right.
Including Sandra's case.
Jeez. I mean, that report really changed the game. It showed that this wasn't just a problem in Stoughton. It was a national issue.
Yeah.
With these programs.
And that report, along with a lot of public pressure, it finally led to a federal indictment against Matthew Farwell for murder.
Okay.
And that was in August of 2024.
Wow.
So the evidence against Matthew just kept piling up. The FBI's pathologist, he found injuries on Sandra's body that didn't line up with suicide.
Right.
Especially this fractured hyoid bone.
Right.
And that's often seen in strangulation cases.
Oh, wow. That's huge.
Yeah. And they also, when they were re-examining photographs, they realized that Sandra was wearing that broken necklace that was later found on the floor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Those findings from the FBI, they're really important. I mean, they totally challenge the idea that it was a suicide.
Yeah.
And they give more evidence to support the idea that somebody killed her,
Yep.
Especially the fractured hyoid bone. I mean, that points to, like, a violent struggle.
Yeah.
And that doesn't fit with the original story.
And that necklace, it seemed like such a small detail.
Yeah.
But it becomes this key piece of evidence.
Yeah.
It's a real reminder of how important it is to do a thorough and fair investigation.
Right.
Especially when you have these conflicts of interest, like in this case.
You're absolutely right. This case it shows how we need to look at every single detail.
Mm-hmm.
We need to question everything, and we need to demand transparency
Yeah.
and accountability,
Right.
especially when powerful people are involved.
And Sandra's story has really affected people all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
Her loved ones and a lot of other people. They're demanding justice, and they want accountability, not just for Matthew Farwell, but for the whole system that failed to protect Sandra.
Yeah, it's a powerful movement, and it's fueled by this shared anger and this demand for change. This case, it goes beyond the loss of one young woman.
Mm-hmm.
It shows how power can be abused within these institutions.
Yeah.
And it shows what happens when that trust is broken.
It's just a really stark reminder that we can't just assume that people in authority will always do the right thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We can't just sit back. We need to be paying attention.
Yeah.
We need to question things.
All right.
And we need to demand transparency and accountability.
Mm-hmm.
This is about protecting people,
Right.
the vulnerable,
Yeah.
and making sure that justice happens.
Yeah.
And it's not just about holding, these individuals accountable. We have to look at the whole system, Like the Marshall Project report, it showed that there was all this misconduct
Yeah.
going on in police explorers programs all over the country.
It makes you wonder how many other Sandras are out there,
Right.
How many other young people were betrayed by the people they should have been able to trust?
That's what's so haunting about this case, right? It really shows that we need to be really paying attention.
Yeah.
We need to be asking questions.
Yeah.
And really pushing for change.
So where does the case stand now?
Well, Matthew Farwell, he's waiting for his trial on those federal murder charges.
Okay.
They haven't filed any state or county charges yet.
Okay.
But the FBI, they've given their evidence to those agencies. So there's this growing pressure for them to take more legal action. But we have to remember he's innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
In court.
What about those other officers? The ones who were involved.
Right.
Have they had to deal with any consequences?
Well, the deputy chief, the one who was running the Explorers program, he was allowed to retire.
Okay.
And Matthew Farwell's twin brother, he resigned from the police force.
Huh.
But as of right now, neither of them have been charged with anything.
It's hard to hear that these men, they were in positions of power and trust,
Right.
and they haven't really been held accountable
Right.
for what they did. It feels like there's been a real failure of justice, not just for Sandra, but for any other victims that might be out there.
It shows how difficult it is to hold these powerful people accountable.
Right.
But, there's so much attention on police misconduct right now.
Yeah.
And with Sandra's case getting so much national attention,
Right.
it might lead to, some kind of justice.
This whole conversation, it makes me think about the media.
Yeah.
And the role they play in cases like this. Would we even know about this story?
Right.
If the Boston Globe,
Right.
Boston Magazine, and the Marshall Project hadn't done all that investigative work.
It's hard to say, but it's clear that investigative journalism, it was a big part of bringing this to everyone's attention.
Right.
They dug deep, they found the truth, and they gave Sandra and her family a voice.
It shows you how important it is to have a free press that can do their job.
Absolutely.
Without journalists who are willing to ask the tough questions.
Right.
And to expose these bad things that are happening in cases like this. They could just get swept under the rug.
Totally. Investigative journalism, it's like a check on power, right? It shines a light on injustice and it demands accountability.
This whole thing it makes me think about that letter that Sandra's mom wrote to the deputy chief.
Right.
The one where she was praising the Explorers program.
Yeah.
It's just so sad to think about how she had all this hope and trust, and it was just totally betrayed.
It shows you how sneaky grooming can be, right?
Yeah.
These predators, they can be in places that seem safe and supportive, and it's so easy for them to take advantage of that trust.
Yeah. So for our listeners, they might not have any experience with law enforcement or programs like the Police Explorers. What's the takeaway for them?
Right.
Why should they care about this story?
Well, Sandra's story, it's a wake-up call, right? It shows us that power can be abused anywhere, in any institution. We need to be aware, we need to question things, and we need to hold people in positions of authority accountable.
And we need to support those investigative journalists who are bringing these stories to light.
Exactly. We all have a part
Yeah.
in making society safer and more just. We need to be paying attention.
Yeah.
We need to speak up when we see something wrong.
Yeah.
And we need to support organizations that are working to prevent abuse.
Right.
And help survivors.
This whole deep dive, it's been really eye-opening.
Yeah.
And really disturbing. It's hard to wrap your head around the betrayal and how the system failed, Sandra.
It really sticks with you, right?
Yeah.
It makes you confront some really uncomfortable truths about power and trust and the systems that we're supposed to be able to rely on.
Yeah. It really makes you question everything you thought you knew about these institutions that are supposed to be there to protect us.
Absolutely. Sandra's story, it's a stark reminder that we can't just be complacent.
Right.
We have to hold those in power accountable. We need transparency. We need reform.
And it shows how important it is
Mm-hmm.
to believe survivals
Yeah.
and to create spaces where they feel safe to come forward and share what happened to them.
You're right. For too long, this kind of abuse has been like silenced and hidden.
Right.
We need to change that. We need to build a society where survivors feel empowered to speak out
Yeah.
and to seek justice.
So for our listeners,
Yeah.
even if they don't have like direct experience with law enforcement
Yeah.
or programs like the Police Explorers, what can they do
Right.
to make a difference?
Well, there are lots of ways to get involved. Support organizations that are working to prevent child sexual abuse, support survivors. You can advocate for stricter laws and policies that protect vulnerable people. Educate yourself, educate others about the signs of abuse
Mm-hmm.
and how to report it. Even small things can make a difference.
It's about creating a culture where people are aware and where people are held accountable.
Exactly. It's about understanding that these issues, they're not just isolated incidents.
Yeah.
They're symptoms of bigger problems in our society that we need to address.
Sandra's story, it's a tragedy in so many ways. It shows that we need to do better. We need to protect those who are vulnerable. We need to hold those in power accountable. And we could work towards a world where tragedies like what happened to Sandra, they're not just something we feel sad about,
Yeah.
but something we actually prevent from happening.
Her story it's a call to action.
Yeah.
It's a call for justice, a call for change. We can't let her death be in vain,
Well said.
right?
This whole deep dive has been incredibly insightful.
Yeah.
Even though it's been heartbreaking, it's a story that I won't forget,
Mm-hmm.
and I hope our listeners won't either.
I hope so too. It's a story that deserves to be heard and remembered.
If this deep dive has resonated with you and you'd like to explore more complex and thought-provoking topics, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive. We'll be back soon with another insightful exploration.
It really does make you think twice, about those institutions that we think are there to protect us.
Yeah, for sure. Sandra's story really shows us that we can't just sit back and assume things are okay.
Yeah.
We have to hold people accountable.
Absolutely.
We need real transparency.
Yeah.
And we need to see some real changes. And it highlights how important it is to believe people who come forward with these kinds of stories, and to create spaces where they feel safe sharing what happened to them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, for so long, this kind of abuse has been, swept under the rug. People haven't wanted to talk about it,
Yeah.
But we have to change that culture, right? We need to create a society where survivors, they feel strong enough to speak up and to get justice.
So what can our listeners do? Even if they're not directly involved with law enforcement or programs like the Police Explorers, how can they make a difference?
Well, there are a lot of things people can do. They can support organizations that are working to prevent child sexual abuse. They can support survivors.
Mm-hmm.
You can advocate for tougher laws
Right.
and policies that really protect vulnerable people. You can educate yourself. You can educate other people about the signs of abuse and what to do if you see it happening. Even small things can make a big impact.
It's all about creating this culture of awareness
Yeah.
and holding people accountable.
Yeah, exactly. And realizing that these issues, they're not just happening in a vacuum, right? They're a sign of bigger problems we have as a society
Yeah.
that we need to face head on.
Sandra's story it's a tragedy on so many levels. It really shows us that we need to do better, that we need to protect people, especially those who are more vulnerable, and we need to make sure that those in power are held accountable for their actions. We have to strive for a world where these kinds of tragedies, they don't just happen and we're left to grieve, but we actually do something to prevent them.
Yeah. Her story, it's a call to action. It's a call for justice. It's a call for change. We can't just let her death be for nothing.
Well said. This deep dive has been so insightful, even though it's also been really heartbreaking. It's a story that'll definitely stick with me, and I hope it'll stay with our listeners as well.
I hope so too. It's a story that deserves to be heard and never forgotten.
And if this deep dive has resonated with you and you're interested in exploring other complex and thought-provoking topics, please subscribe to The Deep Dive. We'll be back soon with another insightful exploration.